Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Magnus. I'm Senior Director of Partnerships here at Dig Ventures, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this event on AI for archaeology and heritage. I'm a white man in my very late 30s with glasses and a moustache, and I'm wearing a green shirt with orange flowers printed on it. Before we get started with the event today, just a quick note on housekeeping. We'll do a question and answer session at the end, so do submit questions in the chat beforehand. I'll pick those out when we get to that point in the event. We do ask we keep the chat friendly and constructive. We're all here to learn today. There's a lot to learn about in this topic. And please do be patient if we have any technical hiccups. We'll resolve them just as fast as we can. So then, with AI being integrated into a huge and occasionally bizarre range of products and services, AI-enabled bird feeder, anyone? And becoming increasingly ubiquitous part of work, life and society at every level. The UK government recently published its own handbook on the safe and effective use of AI in the work of the civil service. We at DV thought that a trends event to try and make sense of the immense amount of noise about this topic would be useful. Dig Ventures was born from a mission to enable more people to take part in real archaeological research. Our founding ethos was rooted in the need to create a channel for archaeology that stays relevant in an ever-changing world and can respond as society's needs and interests change. In order to do this, we've always kept our eyes on the future and on the transformative ideas emerging in the wider creative and cultural industries, technology sector, and social theory. And Trends is currently our main channel for this. So we orient that toward colleagues in the archaeology and cultural and heritage sectors, people you'll meet today on the panel. And in this event, we'll talk about how AI is already shaping and will continue to change the work of the cultural and heritage sectors, and how we as professionals might take advantage of this whilst managing the risks and the ethical challenges that also come along with it. Here with me to discuss this are Dig Ventures' own Dr. Brendan Wilkins, a founder and co-CEO here and the architect of many great innovations, most recently our Deep Time project, which employs AI alongside collective intelligence in mapping cultural and natural heritage. Brendan is currently the holder of an NLHF Heritage Innovation Fund grant to take this project to the next step. Chris Young is a machine learning engineer with a passion for archaeology. Having been in consulting in the past, this has enabled her to work on a rich selection of AI use cases for clients in a variety of industries. She also volunteers this expertise to Dig Ventures and happens to be a published fantasy author. Carol Jones is the editor of the Arts Marketing Association's Knowledge Exchange Hub, Culture Hive, a great resource for the sector and one that I use regularly. She's also leading on the creation of Goose, a new way of peer learning and sharing that harnesses the collective intelligence of the heritage sector and the power of AI. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being a part of this event today. I'll launch into our first topic, which is about how you're using AI in your own work. What's your role and connection to it, personally or professionally? And do share any recent examples that you've seen that you love or hate, and tell us why. So Brendan, why don't you kick us off?
I'll kick things off. First, an introduction to myself. I'm an archaeologist and look probably quite similar to how an AI might imagine an archaeologist to be. I'm a white guy with a beard and glasses, not wearing a jumper, wearing a blue t-shirt today because it's a glorious sunny day in County Durham. So, as Magnus mentioned, Deep Time is one of my pet projects that I'm working with the Heritage Innovation Fund on. And that's a collective intelligence project. So collective intelligence combines people, data, and technology to help us make better, smarter decisions in the present so that we can address often existential common challenges. So AI is very much clearly and self-evidently about data and technology, but I'm more interested in how we bring people into the heart of that equation. So with Deep Time, the way that we've been doing that is we've been partnering with an organisation called Living England, which sits within Natural England and DEF. It's a UK government supported AI initiative that maps habitat baseline data from Earth observation data. So we've been using that baseline data in a human in the loop model with our astronauts and future nauts, everyday citizens that we've trained to spot archaeological features or habitats from Earth observation data, and they've been augmenting and improving that AI-derived baseline data, which is very good, but it has huge issues its accuracy and completeness, we've been using in Archaeology a much more comprehensive data set that can inform nature recovery and biodiversity initiatives, both to find the opportunities for that, but also monitor the efficacy of any nature recovery projects that are taking place. And that's how I sit in this AI world.
Thanks, Brendan. Fascinating, and a lot to unpack as the event goes on. Chris, let's go to you next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. As Magnus said, I'm a machine learning engineer. So I've been building essentially AI products, AI systems, platforms, etc. For quite a while now. And contrary to to Brendan, I'm probably not what the AI would think as when you write engineer. Unfortunately, some biases might come up there from these algorithms. I am a white female. I've got brown hair, and I've got a nose ring. And I've got a very mixed cultural background. So if you ask me where I'm from, it's a very long answer. So I'm not going to get into that here. So I use AI, I mean, other than building it, I also use it. I eat my own dog food and use it when I'm coding, when I'm doing debugging. Find it very useful as well as a sparring partner when trying to kind of think through a problem and wanting to do a little bit of back and forth. And also finding things like optimal parameters. You can use like one machine learning algorithm to try and help you find parameters for another one as you're trying to build these kinds of systems. In terms of something that I've seen out there, I think it's very easy to do the hate ones because there's definitely lots of things we have seen out there that can be borderline dystopian. So I'm going to go for a love today. I saw, I think it was a year ago or a couple of years ago, there was the Vesuvius challenge. And this was a challenge that was uploaded to a platform called Kaggle. For those who are not familiar with Kaggle, it is a platform where machine learning problems are uploaded so that it can be, like, the solutions can be crowdsourced and essentially is done in a way of a competition. So a lot of kind of machine learning solutions have come out of that for businesses and social enterprises and like NGOs, etc. So want to check out if you're trying to look for a machine learning problem and you want to crowdsource a solution. And the Vesuvius challenge was essentially looking at the Herculaneum scrolls, which are these scrolls that are pretty damaged. So people don't want to kind of open them up in order to read them because it's just going to damage them further and they're probably going to get destroyed. So what they did was do a CT scan, which is like a 3D X-ray, I guess. That's the best way to describe it in a simple way. Which was there, and then they used machine learning on top of that in order to be able to detect where the ink is, because some like ink will slip through as well through these scrolls, and try to see the words and try to decipher that. And that was really cool because it was an archaeology one and it was a crowdsourced machine learning solution, which I really, really liked.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. And actually, not the last time we'll hear from Vesuvius, this event, watch this space audience. Carol, let's go to you now.
Hello, and count me in for the AI bird feeder, Magnus. I'm loving the sound of that. I am a white woman, hurtling towards 70, but let's not go there, with grey hair and pink streaks, with large green glasses, and a very winning smile, obviously. I'm feeling a bit of a fraud on this panel. I have to say, I'm definitely not an AI expert, and I know very little about, if anything at all, about archaeology, but I am AI curious. That's how I'm going to describe myself. I'm the innovation lead on a Heritage Lottery funded project, the same project that Brendan's receiving funding for to progress deep time, where we're co-designing a platform to, sounds very pretentious, upskill the heritage sector at scale in the areas of marketing, visitor engagement and access. We're doing it, as Magnus said, through something that we're calling Goose. And it's about democratizing knowledge and making expertise accessible to every heritage professional and volunteer, regardless of their resources, regardless of their location. and it combines that power of AI with, and we're talking a lot already about collective intelligence and collective knowledge, and that's what makes Goose kind of stand out. I think it's yes, it's using AI, but it's that collective knowledge of peers. Um, it's important. So we're not just creating a tool; it's about we're trying to build a movement for change, so that people will learn from and support each other in different ways. Um, and it's very unlike, I suppose, those generic AI tools. We're building it from the ground up. We're co-designing it with people working in the sector from all four corners of the UK, and that's been a steep learning curve. And the idea around that is that it's learning from real experiences, and that makes it dynamic and relevant. It's creating and we're full of Goose kind of puns, creating this knowledge nest that grows more valuable the more users contribute. It changes and it keeps it current and fresh. In terms of how I use it, I do use it as I use it daily. Um, I'm more wedded to Claude actually, than anything else. And do feel sometimes as if I'm cheating. I'm using the other LLMs, which I do as they kind of leapfrog in front or whatever. Out there, I'm seeing a lot of fear, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I'm seeing a lack of AI policies, a lack of guidelines in the sector. Um, there's a lot of things that gives AI a bad name. I think we see all the time. There was a great one a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they published their summer book list, their reading list, and it was totally made up. Lots of made-up books by famous authors, but just no human intervention or editing there at all. A really good thing I've seen recently is the London Museum, and they've been using AI to power relationships between objects and stories, and they have digitized and standardized the data for, I think it's over 7 million objects. It's won a Webby Award, it's won Best Use of Digital UK Award. Don't forget though, they've got big budgets, they've got a big digital team, they brought in one of the best AI agencies to help them develop that. If you're interested in finding out more, there's a great article on Culture Hive about it. Just kind of search London Museum, or I'll give the link to the email later. That's me.
Thanks, Carol. That's great. And we can drop that Culture Hive link in the chat, actually. So we'll do that. Such a range of uses and examples in that discussion to date. And this question of how people are using generative AI is one that I think is really interesting. So we've been looking at a Harvard Business Review article, which is reviewing for the second year running how the kind of top use cases for AI across, actually, funnily enough, they're using an AI to crawl data and message boards to understand how people are using it. So the snake really does eat its own tail. From that Harvard Business Review article, the top use case for 2025 is actually therapy and companionship. And that's followed by organising my life at number 3. Learning moves up the table to number 4. And generating ideas and creativity are also both in the top 10 use cases in that Harvard Business Review article. And I just wondered what the panel make of these changing and evolving uses. Carol, let's go back to you first of all.
I think it's great to see learning moving up the table finally. I think that's great. Made me think of last month, the World Economic Forum published its Future of Jobs report. and it looks at just 5 years into the future, what's going to become important and what's not. And obviously, understanding AI is up there. They do this lovely little matrix of, what's up, what's down, what you need, what's, et cetera, et cetera. And things that are important is that human creativity that you just mentioned and human judgment. And that human judgment, I think we'll see, is becoming really more and more important in an AI-powered world using generative AI. Yeah.
Thanks, Carol. And how about you, Chris? What do you make of the use cases in question?
Yeah, they're quite interesting. They all seem to be quite wellness and self-improvement focused, which I guess makes sense in terms of the title of the article, how people actually use these things. Majority of people will at some point or another probably need one of these kind of tools around one of these topics. There are a few thoughts that I have around this. One is when I saw therapy being the first one, anything kind of medical therapy related, anything that can have an impact directly on a human being falls under what's called an AI high vigilance area. So these are kind of areas where if things go wrong, they can go very wrong. So seeing that therapy and companionship is one of the first ones. I mean, I'm glad that there are things that can help people out there, but it is also one that's kind of raising a few red flags in terms of it needs a lot of guardrails. It needs to be a bit more regulated or a lot more regulated. There are certain regulations around stuff like this already when it comes to like the medical fields and so forth. But regulation is taking a long time to catch up because the technology is moving a lot faster. So when saying things like this, we need to really be thinking around the kind of ethics behind them. Another one that I noticed was AI and creativity. And this one gets a really bad reputation. I've seen, and the reason for this is that it's very easy to also use it badly. But there are also really positive use cases out there on how to use creativity well as kind of a companion to like bounce ideas off and kind of helping you plan things. We'll see some case studies later on where we can use it in a positive way as well. So don't completely write it off just because you've seen maybe some bad examples of things like this. There are always new answers to this stuff. And the last thing that I want to mention is that from a business perspective, right, I'm coming from like building products for businesses. This kind of list obviously is not covering that because it's specifically aimed at individuals, but there are also a lot of use cases around kind of business to business, improving organizations, improving government, improving institutions, improving anything around the planet and society. So the list can be a lot wider once you kind of look outside specifically on an individual scale as well, and lots of things that can be considered there.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. How about you, Brendan?
Very little to add, really. That was so comprehensive from both. But I think what it speaks to is this revolution that's taking place in how we access and synthesize information. In the days of old, of course, we would Google a search term, find 10 different websites, and maybe go through 3 or 4 of them, and then land on whatever it was that we were trying to find. Now it's much more usual to put a question into one of the large language models to get an answer, to ask another question, to get an answer. And there's this dialogue that's taking place in how we're accessing and engaging with the information economy. And I find this research really counterintuitive. Of course, you would just think, oh, ChatGPT or whatever it happens to be is there to write better and smoother emails or what have you. But this look at the kind of very human side of our lives, the kind of that therapeutic dimension to it. How do I organize my life? These are big questions. These are wisdom questions rather than knowledge questions. And I wonder if people are engaging with this new tech at that very fuzzy area where what's the human bit and what's the machine bit, and trying to work out through these questions, where it lands. It feels very emergent, very, very exploratory, and I really like the way that we can now see that in the data.
Awesome. Thanks. And I guess just quickly, Do we have any sense of trends on how this is manifesting in the archaeology and heritage sectors?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's early days. If you think that ChatGPT was launched in November 22, it's just happening. It really feels like it's almost like January 2020. We know something is happening that's going to have massive impacts on nearly every aspect of what we do, not just our professional lives, but we don't really know how that's going to manifest yet. It's this blank slate on which we can project our fears, if that's where we come from, or utopian fantasies, if that's where we come from. So how it actually is impacting on a practical level is very vague. People are talking about it. It's very little published, but it's down to individuals. It's down to organisations that are implementing it themselves. And as Carol was mentioning, very few have policies around this and have a kind of an official line on it.
Indeed, thanks very much. And that these official lines and organisational policies and so on are a really important tool when it comes to managing ethical considerations and our approach to them around AI. And we know from general public discourse and discussions within the archaeological sector that there are significant ethical considerations to be made around intellectual property and copyright and so on, environmental impact. I wonder, what do we think that panel? What do we think the major ethical considerations are? Chris, I'm going to go to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, when it comes to kind of ethics in AI, I like to think about it in terms of impact. And the reason for that is that that's ultimately what matters. And it also democratizes the thinking. I think often we get kind of stuck in trying to figure out the technicalities when this is actually something that we all should be thinking about and we all should be responsible for. Depending on which part of the end-to-end process you're in using AI, whether it's building, gathering data, building, or just using the systems, there will be different levels of responsibility and different things that you have control of. But nonetheless, at the whole end-to-end process, there's a certain level of responsibility. And thinking about it in terms of impact can really help us all be part of that process. So when I think about impact, I would say, and this is a Chris list, this is my own invented list of how I break this down. I'm sure other people break it down in a different way, but just based on my experiences and what I've seen in terms of business, there are three kind of types of impact that I would say. One is malicious intent. So if someone wants to build something bad, they're going to build something bad and it's going to do the bad thing. The system does what it's meant to do based on that, but this is a human problem, right? This is someone has chosen a tool and used it for something bad. That's not a technology problem. The second is unintended issues. And this is what you usually see in terms of like the big headlines online, right? Something has gone wrong because either the problem was not thought well through enough, the data that was gathered was not really representative of whatever the system needed to do. People didn't know any better. Maybe the responsibility of who needs to think about these ethical issues was kind of unclear and nobody thought about them. Maybe there are no processes in place in the organization that was building something or in the team that was building something that can do these checks, safety checks, to make sure that things work correctly and ethically. And there can be edge cases. The reality is that people don't necessarily always think of everything that could possibly go wrong. And we need to have, and it's important to have the way to get feedback in order to understand the things that have gone badly so that things can be improved. So this unintended issues is essentially like the system is not working as intended, right? Something went wrong. And the third kind of impact is second and third order implications. And this one I would say is one of the hardest because this is a situation where the system works as intended, but something else was affected by that system in some negative way. So just to give you an example of what that might look like, you have a grocery ordering system that you now need to optimize in order to reduce food waste and reduce costs for the organization. Seems like a straightforward problem. It's not affecting an individual directly. Good for the environment, you're not wasting food, and good for the organization, they also save costs. You implement the system, but then after a while, you realize that in some village somewhere, that grocery store branch is no longer ordering from the local farmers. It's ordering from some big distributor in the center, in some other big city. suddenly you're affecting that local farmer's business. And you're also affecting the quality of the people that live in that village, because now they're no longer getting as fresh products, they're potentially getting lower quality products from someone else. Even though your system is working correctly, you could have added constraints to make sure that these second and third order implications did not happen. So if we're all thinking about impact, we're all actually equipped to bring our own experiences in order to understand where things might go wrong, so that we can build guardrails and make sure that we're building responsible systems.
Thanks, Chris. I think I found that very reassuring, because it's like implementing any new process in a way, the thing you just described. So thank you very much. And Carol, you're doing this live in the heritage sector right now. I wonder if there's anything coming through there that's specific to heritage, that maybe resonates with what Chris was saying, or your experience.
I think a lot of these things are real minefields, in terms of particularly ethics and bias. We're very keen not to have a platform that is pumping out misinformation, and in all our co-design, the importance of trust has really been right at the top. And we're looking at how do we deal with AI hallucinations, how do we give people ownership of their own stories, and that kind of ownership, I think, the power of owning your own narrative is increasingly important. We are, that intellectual property and copyright kind of consideration is really interesting, I think. I'm not sure if those legal and technical safeguards are moving anything like quickly enough. A lot of sites, and we've been tempted to do it, are locking down all their knowledge so they can't get scraped. So it's the opposite in a way of democratizing that learning. We've decided not to do it with Culture Hive, our knowledge hub, and we need to keep any of the learning unfettered, I think, for the Heritage Lottery funded project. Culture Hive is a really site, so it has 250,000 kind of views with 120 plus thousand active users. We get a lot of referrals from ChatGPT. When I say a lot, it's creeping up literally week by week. So that's one of the benefits of, in terms of SEO, if nothing else, of it. The last time, and something that we're really aware of as well with Goose, is that I asked all of the big LLMs to generate images of doctors and then of nurses. And hopefully this has changed. I'm not convinced it has. Do try it. All the doctors, all the images of doctors were white men, and all the nurses were women, but more ethnically mixed. So there's a big thing there. I think we're also concerned with Goose in terms of environmental impact, and so will our users be. And we're looking at that using not the kind of high use model, but maybe the lower model. When do we switch to the high use model? And when do we go back? Can we actually generate for users the amount of their carbon usage, so that can actually then offset it potentially, tell them what they need to do that. Definitely don't do what I do, which is have chats with Claude and always say thank you, because that's using up quite a lot of kind of the resources of the planet. So try not to do that. Having said that, come the AI revolution, me and Claude, I'm going to get saved.
Nice. Thanks, Carol. That's great. Brendan, I want to get into some case studies now, but have you got a last word on ethical considerations around AI in the heritage sector?
Just to add to both those great answers. So as Chris was showing that it's really there's an engineering challenge here that needs people in the heart of it.
Yeah.
And engineers aren't necessarily the best people to reflect the broader aims, wishes, desires, challenges of society. So we need to find this way to democratically bring people into the heart of this kind of technology. And one of the first ways we do that is by demystifying it. So even the term AI, which is relatively recent rebranding of, let's just call it statistics, it's almost like a sexy maths. It makes predictions on the basis of what it's been trained. And so taking that point of view stops us seeing it as this kind of this black box that does all these things magically. I'm reminded of the Arthur C. Clarke quote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I think the first goal in this ethical conversation should be demystifying the magic. Because if we can get that right, then we can bring people into the heart of fixing these problems.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Demystification. I think that is what it's all about, making it explainable.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, let's look at some case studies now because, there are a range of applications across the cultural sector. And I think it's interesting to look at this stuff in application. So, Brendan, do you want to start with telling us about the choral artwork, the call?
Sure. The Call, amazing piece of artwork, led by the artists Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst at the Serpentine Gallery, working with Eva Jager and the Serpentine Arts Collective team, to do this thing that I've just been trying to push for, the demystification of the magic behind AI. So the idea, in a nutshell, they were using an AI to create new choral music, but in order to do that, they had to create a training data set, and they went around 15 different choirs all over the UK, provided each with a songbook, and each choir sang and was recorded, and that data then became a training data set for an AI. Now, what was interesting was how this work would then surface as a gallery installation and then something called a data trust. So firstly, the gallery installation. You kind of moved through the gallery, and as you moved through, you went around various aspects of the installation, which were a way of trying to explain almost to the viewer the stack on which AI is based. So at the very bottom of the stack, we have our common resources, whether that's electricity or water. Above that, we have the vast server farms that then are used to house these AIs. Above that, we have our training data set, which is the sum of all knowledge published on the internet and beyond. Above that, we have our foundational models. We'll think of ChatGPT or Gemini or others. And then above that, we have the way that we interact with these models. I'm summarizing to some extent, but that's, of course, the applications that you see either as a native app on your phone or through your web browser. So moving through these different layers of an AI stack, it forces you to think about how it's not just a private enterprise, but it's built on this kind of continuum between collective shared wisdom, public utilities, public research, and then some element of private enterprise in there as well. And seeing that kind of allows the visitor to think about, how they interact with this, which bits that they can have a lever on or not, which bits are public and which bits are private. And that's really important in terms of bringing people into the heart and being more democratic about how these different AI models are used and implemented. And then the second part really lent heavily into that idea, which was the creation of a data trust. So that data that all these choirs had produced was then housed within a trust, a legal mechanism that allowed all of the choirs and all of the choristers to democratically decide on how that data should be used in future. They decided collectively that it should be used for this gallery installation, but could quite easily decide that it could be used for others or different purposes. going forward. And that has this real impact and forces us to think about those ethics around IP, collective IP and individual IP. So one chorister's voice is great, but not as important as a collective voice. And holding that collective data then this can allow us to think about how it might be used in future business economies and future purposes as well. So hugely influential for us here at Dig Ventures as we think about deep time and how we collect data across landscapes that can then be used for the public good, but also how we can ensure that our astronauts and future nauts have a democratic lever on how that data might be used and the kind of organisations that they could use it with.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Chris, I was wondering if you've got any reflections on that explainability, the call as an example of this demystification process.
Yeah, I really like this example. I mean, I firstly liked quite a lot about the curiosity that people had, the fact that they didn't go, AI, not going to use that, especially it's a creative example as well. So it's a really good one for that too. And the fact that governance was thought out as from the beginning, not as an afterthought, not let's try these random things and only then figure out what to do with this data, which is really nice. And it's very appropriate for use cases like this, where you have one data set, for example, that is not a huge, huge amount of data, and the problem that you're solving is maybe not really dynamic. One thing that I would say is a consideration is that as you scale that and as the problems become more dynamic, that becomes more difficult to do. So if you're, for example, in a system where there's daily millions of users doing things on your system, it's a lot more difficult to curate the data manually. So you need to have systems that themselves are helping with that curation approach. And those systems themselves might have issues as well. So lots of considerations to keep in mind here. And of course, which considerations and what is going to be really dependent on the use case itself. And I'm always kind of going to go back to that, the use case and the impact of what makes the most sense for what you're doing. So you really need to think about it end to end. And this is a really great example of what to do in that early data curation aspect. And we can definitely learn a lot from that and bring a lot of that at different scales as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. That's a lot to think about there. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to try and motor through this next case study because we've got a lot of active discussion going on in the chat that I want to make space for at the end. So our next case study is something called Pollinator Pathmaker. Pollinator Pathmaker is a bit of online AI software designed between artists and botanists that essentially allows you to you give it your garden space, and it will design you a planting scheme that enables bees to visit as many plants as possible with the energy that they've got when they leave the hive, thus pollinating as many plants as possible, promoting biodiversity net gain that way, and also ensuring that bees, which are essential to our continued existence on this planet, thrive. Brendan, I was wondering what you make of this case study. We talk a lot about AI and the environmental impact of the technology itself, a very important point and one I want to cover in the discussion. But here we've got one which is actually contributing to biodiversity net gain in a way.
Sure, a phenomenal example. Again, it's bringing people into the heart of the platform. It's working with people, and it's kind of building its empathy with the non-human world. And so it suggests certain plantings of your garden which might look aesthetically pleasing to humans, but also to think about how we can make pollinator corridors within those areas. How we can do a sort of biodiversity and nature recovery area of our gardens. That we've got our lovely flower beds, but what about leaving an area completely wild? And it helps people do this. So I really like this example because it's that two-way flow, and it's helping us see the world in an entirely new world. It's bringing us to new understandings, and that has to be the best possible outcome of using this kind of technology.
Awesome, thanks. We will move then rapidly to our last case study, which is quite different, certainly an AI for creativity one. We're talking about the TikTok account Time Traveller POV. Time Traveller POV creates AI generated video of particular moments in history. And we're going to look at a few of those just now. Far easier to show you than to explain. Folks, do bear in mind that this might be slightly louder than the discussion has been to date, so you may need to turn your volume down sharpish. So we'll just move swiftly from AD 79 to 1518 and the dancing plague.
Billy, are you okay? No plague, no rave, just peace. Amen.
Now, Carol, I know you've been thinking a lot about Time Traveller POV, and we'd love to hear more.
So what have we got here, people? Do put your comments on what you think, your immediate comments in the chat. It'd be really interesting. I think the important thing here is balance. How do we balance that immersive engagement, because it's so immediate, it's so personal, it's going to reach audiences who might find that traditional kind of Pompeii history a bit dry, a bit inaccessible. They might not go to the usual. They use TikTok. They want a TikTok experience. It's also on Insta, I think, and also on YouTube. But that focus on putting you into the action, I suppose, means that those point of view videos can make things really relatable and draw people in. And really get across that, we're the same, same emotions, same fears, same motivations. So there's a lot of good stuff there. And for me, the balance thing is, how do we balance that with a real oversimplification, lowest common denominator thinking, distorting history, losing the context of history, and prioritizing that entertainment value over any type of accuracy. So for me, it's all about balance. The Dancing Plague of 1518, I was taken in by completely. I thought that was a total spoof. Complete spoof. And I said that to Magnus, that'd be great, because it's obviously a spoof, and look at all the comments, and how it's really kind of misleading people. And then I thought, I better check that. And it was real. It was real. And of course, it's not as it was interpreted in that POV, but it was kind of mass hysteria, lots of kind of, jerking and almost like dancing. And the interesting thing about it is it did lead me to find out more. And there's some work around there around about is sparking that curiosity to learn more. However you do that, is that a valid thing? What do you think? Put your comments. I think there's, a lot of potential for using it as a stepping stone. And if it is a bit kind of tarty, then maybe make that clear and add on additional kind of sources. I mean, I just went back to very old school and I Googled it. That's how I found out about it. So I'm not ashamed to mention that either. But lots of and you might kind of think of archaeological kind of uses for it. And maybe it's something that you could use like before or after actually visiting. Um, the Black Country Living Museum have done a lot, not using AI, but using TikTok videos to attract Gen Z. And that's really interesting, I think. And they found that a really high percentage of those people who watched the video then came for the first time to the museum itself. So there's lots of potential there, I think. But, pros and cons.
Absolutely. It definitely comes with a health warning, some of that stuff, especially those tiny breads. Why are they
What's it with the tiny breads? The feet. If you've got a feet complex, it's problematic, I think.
Yes, apologies for any complexes triggered by those videos. We'll do content warnings in future. Yeah, we talk a lot here at Dig Ventures and in archaeology generally about ladders of engagement and things that can get people in before they then progress to a more interested level. And I think there's something in that there too. And that brings us to our sort of main discussion with the panel here. Where can we go and what should inspire us? Does anyone have a kind of a kind of vision or idea of AI use in archaeology and heritage that they want to share? A daydream, a grand design?
I'm going to mention Goose straight away because for me it's all about democratization, isn't it? And giving everybody that opportunity. If you're, we mentioned the London Museum and their big resources, but for a volunteer organisation, you might be running, say, a small corner shop museum, and they need that kind of support, I think. And we're finding out more and more that people really respect experts, but actually they value the knowledge of their peers even more. And it's being able to get that out there using AI as a technology, I think. One of the things that inspired me, I think, was old school, was Wikipedia's success in crowdsourcing that knowledge creation. And that's certainly one of the areas, although we've gone down a very different route in terms of inspiring Goose.
Thanks, Carol. Brendan, have you got any grand designs as comes to crowdsourcing and artificial intelligence?
1,000,001. We've gone through some of them, but I would just say, look, there are ethics that we've talked about, but use those values as your compass to navigate you through this unknown and yet to be known world. In terms of practicalities, there are all manner of different ways to learn what's often called prompt engineering. YouTube is my go-to, Reddit forums are. Each day I'm trying to think about different workflows and different tools that we can bring in to our work here at Dig Ventures that can be ethically driven, but also realize that broader mission, and can see in some of the comments that that we really have this opportunity to engage and to connect and to bring people into the heart of what we do. I'm reminded of what's often called the Gartner hype cycle. The idea that technology goes through this very clear progression where we have this innovation trigger, this peak of inflated expectations, a trough of disillusionment, a slope of enlightenment on the other side, and then a plateau of productivity. So we're really right into the heart of that peak of inflated expectations, I feel, and it's yet to go even higher. But really what we want to do is get to the other side, because on the other side we can see how this new tech can not just change organizations, but build entirely new kinds of organizations that don't exist yet. and have this net positive for society, as long as we bring people into the heart of the process. So roll your sleeves up, experiment, do it ethically.
Awesome. Chris, just in a minute or so, could you just, as someone sitting outside the archaeology sector, but deeply embedded in machine learning, if you were telling someone uninitiated how to start learning about this topic, what might you say?
Right. So, I mean, I've already mentioned the impact stuff, so I think that's kind of to drive all of your decisions that you're making here. But on a more practical side of things, there are a lot of resources that you can find online. Fairly.ai is a good website that has a collection of loads of information when it comes to responsible AI. And what's relevant to you versus not will depend on which end of the end-to-end process you're in. I'm going to assume probably on the archaeology side, you're going to be on the far right of this end-to-end process, which would be using these machine learning algorithms rather than building specifically. And some examples of things that you could look at there are model and system cards. Model and system cards are essentially describing the models that exist out there. So all of the big, for example, the large language model providers, they all have model or system cards for each one of their models. And these describe things that could go wrong with that model, how they were assessed, what are things that they noticed along the way. It also describes some like technical information about the models themselves. But the things that could go wrong and like how things were assessed is a really useful place to look when you're trying to use these models to help you think through that impact that we discussed earlier. Responsible AI scorecard is something. So the first one was system and model cards. This is a scorecard. Lots of cards in responsible AI. And responsible AI scorecards are essentially a way to help you assess your own use cases. So if you're doing something, if you're trying to apply this machine learning algorithm to something that you're doing, is to help you think through the impact that it will have and approaches that you might need to consider for said impact. And the last and my favorite, bring your team together and do a workshop. Look through the workflow that you're doing. The more diverse, the more people, the better, right? Everyone's going to think through different approaches. They all have different experiences and they'll think of different types of impact that you yourself might not be thinking about. So the more people you bring into the conversation, the more you're going to bring up and be able to tackle. If you're more technical, look at Fairly AI. There's lots of different tools as well and frameworks that you can look at.
Thanks, Chris. Really speaking my language there. Getting a diverse range of perspectives on any problem is one of the best ways to solve it. I want to move to question and answer our Q&A session now quickly in the time we've got left. And Katrina Gargett, a friend and colleague in the sector, has asked a question which I think is really important and which we probably haven't dwelt on quite enough thus far. Katrina asks, what are the environmental impacts of AI and how do we account for that as organisations exploring its use in our carbon accounting? So there's a lot of discussion in the popular press about AI's environmental impact and also a big move in the cultural and heritage sectors to account for our own carbon emissions. And I'm just wondering what anybody makes of that. Carol, has that come up in the Goose process at all?
Absolutely. And not just in Goose, but across all our work in the Arts Marketing Association, across everything we do. We carbon offset all our emissions with the exception of AI, because we haven't worked out how to count. We've got our head firmly in the sand when it comes to AI. It's something, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at quite carefully with Goose. And there is a big difference in environmental impacts, whether or not you're using, say, the free, less intensive version of an LLM and the big, research version. So I would recommend doing that. Every interaction has an impact, everyone. So actually, I wasn't joking when I said don't do what I do and constantly thank whoever it is you're using and have those little chit chats. That's all kind of adding up. And I think one of the things we're trying to build into Goose is that kind of this is what you've used, so that people can understand to use it effectively and efficiently and with human judgment. not just as a plaything.
Thanks.
It's a big issue.
Yes, it is. Does anyone else on the panel have some thoughts? Chris?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about this as well. So there's kind of two areas that that people would need to think about in this case. One is the organizations that are actually building these models from scratch, and those organizations they are working on making their data centers more climate friendly and things like that, because it involves looking at a lot of usage of power, for example. The actual processes in those big buildings like water and so forth also have an effect. A lot of silicon and plastic and stuff. So there are a lot of these big organizations are looking into the stuff. Ultimately, there's going to be some regulations, if there aren't specific ones that I'm aware of, around this as well, which will encourage large organizations to take that forward as well.
There's lots of misinformation coming out of those big organizations like OpenAI, though. I mean, listening to Sam Altman a couple of weeks ago saying what it was just complete, made up. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's definitely look at these announcements with skepticism, and this is where regulation comes in, right? Because it needs to be enforced to make sure that these things are actually happening. The other side to think about is, of course, you as a person that is using these kind of models or building something on top of them. Always think, you've already mentioned this, Carol, is always think like, do I need the biggest model out there? Like my use case is probably not needing that, especially if you're doing like, I don't know, some data extraction from natural language processing. You don't need the fanciest, bougiest model that exists, right? There are smaller models that you can use for these things. A lot of people think as well that, I need to fine tune my models like to make them very specific to what I'm using. But there are other approaches that work just as well for the use cases that people want without requiring to do further training of the models. And really, or training a new model entirely, use existing models that are out there, right? If you can, if they solve your use case, use what is out there, add guardrails, of course, think of the ethical considerations as well based on the models that you're using, look at their model cards, try to understand what could go wrong, and make the decisions based on all of these questions. Don't immediately go, we need to build a new model or or something like this, because your use case probably doesn't require that. So take those things into consideration.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Brendan, have you got a take on the environmental impact of AI that you want to share?
Those questions aced it. Those answers aced it for me. If there's other questions, let's get to those.
Okay, great. So we've got time for one more question, I think, before we wrap up. And I wanted to pick up on Sarah Bradshaw's point. Sarah's new to AI, and she works on connecting communities with archaeology at UNESCO sites in conflict zones like Sudan. And few people around those sites have computers, but they do have phones. How might Rebecca use AI for that kind of work?
Chris, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I'm just forming it. 1 second. Right. So when it comes to using things on a mobile device, so there's kind of two things that you can look at. I always have a list of things. One thing is machine learning on edge computing is a thing. There's a whole field around how do you optimize machine learning models so that they can actually run on a device. I've worked on a project like that. There's definitely tools out there that work to run something locally, especially for locations where you might not have internet, for example. However, edge computing needs to happen on something like a smartphone, which is not necessarily always available in certain locations, which might still be using, I don't know what we call the old feature phones, I think it was called. In these locations, you do have, and I forgot the name, which is what I was trying to form, forgot the name of the technology, but where you can go like star number hash or whatever to send some information via the phone network, and then that triggers something. So you could use this kind of approach to enable people to send requests, for example, via a mobile network, and then do some machine learning on your compute and then send a response back. So these are two approaches that you can consider when it comes to running machine learning or receiving machine learning responses for a mobile device.
And of course, deep time would be a fantastic application in this instance. mapping sites at scale, landscapes at scale. So instead of it just being the isolated UNESCO dots on a map, it becomes entire regions of archaeology and heritage landscapes, and bringing people into the heart of that, not just locally, but around the world to increase that understanding. We should definitely talk with Rebecca, I think.
Yeah, that would be great. And I would also just flag that there's a recently published digital cultural heritage report from the British Council in Imagination, Innovation and Opportunity, came out this week actually, which is looking at applications of creative and cultural technology, including AI, in the global south around cultural heritage.
I think that's a fascinating question, Rebecca. I think what I liked from how you phrased the question was it implies that you're really thinking about how community voices must lead in that. I think digitization and AI is, there's a big power thing here, and it's who's controlling the stories that are coming out of there. And I think AI can really amplify those marginalized voices or can silence them even further. And actually, that's the choice is ours, really, which way people go. And so that's a really important kind of thing.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid we are very much at time, slightly scraping over actually, and I'm conscious of everyone's busy schedules. So we will have to call it a day there. But let me wrap up first of all by thanking our panelists, Carol, Chris and Brendan, for their thoughts and contributions today, and also for to all of our attendees for their great questions. In terms of what we've got coming up next on Trends, we'll be back online in an event like this one in October, looking at immersive technology and play. And do keep an eye on our socials for Dig Ventures socials for updates at the moment on many exciting field discoveries. We're in field season. We just demobilised the site last week, and we're mobilising another one in a couple of weeks. So lots going on there, and also updates on the Deep Time project. And please do use the QR code on screen to sign up for the DV Trends newsletter. You'll get a monthly digest of insights from our team on trends, topics and best practice, including a lot of the stuff that we've referred to today. And it's a great inspiration for anyone working in public engagement in natural or cultural heritage. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and thanks again to our panelists, and see you very soon.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Bye.